Welcome to another episode of the Land Lab. We are at the Richland County 73-acre listing that Justin and I have. This is where we kind of take things to the next level beyond the listing itself, where we show you the strategic aspects of properties and give you ideas as to what could be done in the future. And today we have Bryan Perrizo from Custom Game Land Services. He's kind of the creative mind behind all this. He was hired to set this property up, and so we invited him out here so he could kind of walk us through and tell us exactly why he did the things he did here.
Over there, like in that fall plot, we would put corn in that next year as a rotation. Down below, we're actually thinking about rotating that into beans for a season, kind of get a little rotation in there and a little bit better weed management for the season. In this plot, we've got clover alfalfa. That clover alfalfa is probably on its fourth year. So really, it looks really good for its fourth year, but we're probably gonna need to do another chemical application in there. And when we finish up in that, we've got this native strip that kind of creates a boundary between the two food plots here. This native strip comes up and it's about, yay tall, 4 or 5 feet tall. And the forbs that come up in here is really, really great nutrition. And we try to provide this very wide, broad spectrum balance of nutrition for the deer. So in this area, I would like to see it burned off annually, and that'll inspire better forb production to come through and kind of knock the grasses back. And it'll allow some better grasses to come through as well at the same time.
Overall, it's a pretty big area. Like, there's a lot of food here. And I like how you've got a variety based on, different parts of the season. Certain parts of these plots are going to be more attractive than others, and I also like how you've got mixed in some annuals with some perennials, and kind of having this year-round green over here in the alfalfa. One, I like the mixture of it, but two, I like the maintenance aspect of it too. This is kind of minimizing your work. You've got the house down there, which this is very much in view of, and I'm a big fan of alfalfa in those areas because it's very green. It's pretty. It's pretty to look at. So when they're sitting on their deck and they're looking over an alfalfa field, aesthetically, it's very pleasing to the eye. Plus, it's attractive to the deer year round.
Yeah, and that's kind of the goal, is to create. Our design plans kind of shoot for this 365-day nutrition plan. So if we can kind of balance that out with strategizing different food sources and kind of covering that time frame, then that's really what we're shooting for. And even in the corn, now I call that corn, but that's 70% corn, 30% soybeans.
Okay.
Every year. Okay. So, like for the last 2 years, it's always been 30% soybeans, 70% corn. And so you get the soybeans that produce in there, and that creates this longer window of utilization for that plot itself. Now the deer are gonna go in there, they're gonna use them soybeans, they're gonna eat them off as a forage crop during the summertime.
Okay.
We're not expecting those beans to make it to putting on pods or setting pods later into the season, because by that time the corn should be coming to about ripe time, and they should have pretty well picked off all the soybeans, and they typically do. Here we've got this line of apple trees that's planted between where the house is and where the suggested food sources are. Now over time, when these trees get up, these are a standard tree. They're not a dwarf or a semi-dwarf. They're a standard tree, so we're shooting for height with these. When they do get up, that's going to create this buffer area between the house and the food plot setting. So it'll kind of create this buffer area where you can't see so much. It'll add a little screening and depth to that. Not only that, but it'll diversify the food source, and that'll pair real nice with the greens at that time of the year. And you'll notice with almost every orchard setting that we produce, there's always a water source. They seem to pair really nicely together, always. Apple trees prefer to have a more dry root system. They don't like wet feet. So we try to put them on the upper side of the pond where the water drains off of them, and then they'll dry out nice, and they seem to do really well.
Okay. We're coming up out of that, what we'll call the valley plot, close to the house.
So this plot is real close to the access, and that's great. That's fine if you wanted to hunt over it. It's a clover alfalfa plot. This was originally what was here. Basically, the positioning of this plot wasn't perfect or ideal. So what we did was we decided we were going to thicken it up by installing these apple trees. And the apple trees will create a little bit more cover in this area. And the clover alfalfa will kind of feed the apple trees with the nutrients that they need.
Yeah. And I could see this just a nice little transitional plot for deer that are coming out a little bit earlier, stopping in here, feeding on the clover.
And it is an easy access.
Super easy access right off the main. And so I could, you could easily visualize the deer coming out of the big woods, stopping in here briefly, and then slowly transitioning down to where the bigger food source is.
Yep. And that's ideally what those lower food plots in this valley are designed for. So when we look at the way that the food plots are designed on this property, this is actually the largest section of food source being utilized. So ideally, when the rest of the food sources are starting to become depleted, and now we're talking later into the season, we're hoping that the deer are focusing on coming down here into the valley to feed, which when you pair that with late season weather conditions, you don't really want to be traveling deep into the property anyway.
Sure.
So the easiest access for you to hunt and be able to hunt successfully is going to be right close to the cabin.
Yeah, makes it really ideal. I mean, you could easily make an argument that, oh, it's too close to the house because you can see the house. But at the same time, there are days where maybe you'd get in late, maybe the weather's kind of crappy and it breaks late. And it does give you an option to very quickly and easily get into a setup for that last hour and a half after that weather breaks. And it could be magic in that last hour and a half.
Based on the way the thermals would flow on this property, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Being on the low side, having the deer come into this valley, coming in from the high side, you're going to have the advantage on them. We're on this main trail headed up into the rest of the property to the upper part of the ridge. And this bowl, this pocket in here, has been subject to a timber harvest. I think it was about 5 years ago. And so you can see that there's some early regen going on in here, but it's not going to be real substantial for about the next 15 to 20 years. So if it was me and I'm buying this property and I'm looking at where the suggested or the bedding is locally on this property, it's going to be on that ridge. And if this is our main access, I think for the time being, I would add some early successional screening along here with some pine trees and some spruce trees. And that way we try to get some cover that comes up on this side of the trail, this south face. Now, we don't want to get too far in here because there is some pretty decent hardwood regen in this. And so your oak regeneration coming back in the future, we don't want to try to disturb that too much, but there is probably about 10 yards in here that we could utilize for some screening rows of trees. This upper ridge is definitely the heart of the property. It's where 90% of the deer movement is going to be on a regular basis, whether it's between food sources, bedding area, or water source with the pond area back there. But this is basically a micro plot of what we see down below. So you have the same setup. You have a fall plot here. There's a divide in the middle. You have clover alfalfa on the far end. And then you have more annual crops on the far end down there. The primary bedding that we have assessed is going to be over here to the north, and what we're trying to do is get the deer to come out of there and work around. So if you can get up in here, accessing this plot, maybe sitting in that stand or one locally in here that you might place, ideally we're trying to draw the deer out of that bedding area. The plot behind us here is a clover alfalfa plot. Now the divide line is right here. And you can see from this side over has been drilled with clover alfalfa. And the reason that we're doing this on this half of the plot is because this is going to be the furthest extremity of the plot going in toward the neighboring property. And so ideally, when we get the deer to come out, as we get later into the season, we want to bring them further and further into the property. So ideally, they can graze through here, but we want them to end up in here and not closer over there. The further we can bring them into the property, into the heart of the property, the more opportunity it's going to give you as a landowner, as a hunter, to have an opportunity at harvesting that deer and then holding them more central to the property itself. And the same kind of goes for the plot that's over here. Is we've got this annual plot that's continued and extended up into this bowl, this little pocket, and it's screened out by the corn. So if your main trail cuts up through the middle, it's not exactly the best access, but you have some screening there that'll allow you to get to the stand location that's there in the corner or to this stand location in this corner. So out of all the crops that we can utilize for screening, the one that seems to stand the best here in Wisconsin for the winters that we have is going to be corn. So once it's all depleted of the corn itself, it's just a screen.
Sure.
So I mean, that's realistically, that's ideal for the scenario that we're setting up here, and that's why you'll see it in all the plots. There's corn incorporated into each one of these as a screening, if nothing else.
Mostly on the edges.
On the edges, yep. And it creates this kind of pathway. So like when we look at how deer utilize edging, they're going to follow the edge of the field. They're also going to follow the edge of the corn. And if you look at the way the proximity of the blind and the corn is, it puts them about 10 yards right in your lap. It's a great setup. We know for a fact that the deer historically are walking out on that point, right? Well, a lot of times they use these boundary sides, like these slopes, just off of the point itself, where it runs the boundary of the point, and it slips them over and allow them into the next patch of timber. And so in here, what we did is the pond was installed, and then after that we did the orchard effect on the pond where it slopes down into there, as we talked about earlier. And then what you're going to do in this area is you're going to allow this grass and the forbs to grow up as a natural native set aside in between here. So for the first few years, you know, with the tree planting, it's suggested to do some mowing in here and keep the weeds back so that the trees can produce. But once we get about 4 or 5 years after that planting, we just kind of want to let it go into a natural state and just be taken over from there. Now, every year you'll manage that with a mowing in the spring to kind of set everything back and disrupt that ground so that you get forb production again that year. But that's really ideally what this is for.
It makes a nice break too between the plots. If this natural area wasn't here, you'd be able to see clean across this ridge top all the way to the other side. So kind of strategically, if a buck comes up over here or over there, they can't just look across and see if there's a doe over there. They actually have to make the trek over here to check it out.
They do.
So it helps when you're in any one of these given stand locations or box blind locations, anything that comes up that is curious, they actually have to walk.
So we're looking at the water hole that's up on the upper ridge here, and it's very unique to have a water site on the upper side of a ridge. This one is very centrally located into the property as far as east and west, and therefore it's going to allow a lot more deer to be utilizing the center part of the property, where we can guarantee on a regular basis deer are coming and utilizing on a daily routine. When you look at the timber that is on this property, nothing was cut so aggressively that'll regen as aggressively as this will, and this is going to be some of the best deer habitat that we're going to find on this property over the course of the next 10 to 15 years. A lot of the species that we're seeing pop back up in here is going to be aspen. So we're seeing a lot of aspen regeneration in here, and that's great. That's for deer habitat especially, that's kind of the main focus is trying to get clones or cloning effect from the aspen itself. So when you come in and you shear an aspen patch, it clones from the single stump and it spreads out from the root system and resprouts. And we're seeing that in here, and that's what you're seeing for the majority. Now, this is mixed in with some multiflora rose and some autumn olive and things like that, but you really wouldn't want to manage this site for invasives yet because you have no competing canopy.
Gotcha.
So as we can see, the aspen is getting above that line, and eventually it'll start to canopy, and when it starts to do that, then you'll want to assess the invasives in here. But that's so you kind of give the 1-2 punch to the invasives, where you're chemically treating them, and then you're stubbing them out with the canopy after that. And then furthermore, looking in future practices, when all this aspen gets up, this is a potential to do this all over again. So here's an area that's a great prime example for long-term management sites. And that's really what anybody should be, ideally when you're managing for wildlife, you should be selecting and picking areas with certain practices that'll extend the period in which you can apply these practices, so that instead of, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to set this property up, we're going to set a design up for 10 years, and then after that 10 years, the habitat goes stagnant. Here's an area where you can come back in, you can repeatedly practice the same methods and get the same results. So this would have been a historical bedding area for the deer. So what that means is in the time that we would have been able to assess the habitat on this property and knowing what it was prior to, this is where we were finding at least a significant portion of the deer to be bedding on the property is on this point. And then there's another point that actually comes out over there a little bit further at the deer bedding on. We did cuts in both of these areas. Now, the MFL had came in here and did a harvest in these locations with the previous practice somewhere, about 5 years ago. What they didn't do, though, is they didn't do the backside practices where they kind of come in and they manage for some of these non-desirable or undesirable tree species. And they left a bunch of the trees that were damaged or deformed from that practice. And so that gave us an opportunity to come in and do some habitat management locally into these bedding areas where they had already done some disruption. And to kind of complete that MFL practice to its extent. So in here, you can see a lot of this is ironwood. And the ironwood is not real good for timber production. It's not real great for deer habitat either. So we can utilize that. Instead of having a standing tree for structural cover, we can use that better as side cover, structural cover, closer to the lower level. And so that's what we've done in here. We've done some hinge cutting. Now these hinges are not designed to last for a very long time, 3 to 5 years, and then they kind of die out once the canopy and natural regeneration kind of takes its course. And that's kind of the ideal scenario here is working with an MFL to improve timber stands as well as improve habitat within those timber stands. If we can kind of walk that line, tread that line between the two, that's a really sweet deal that we can work out with some landowners on that program. And this is one of them. So this bedding area, if we look at the way that this has become such a nasty, gnarly mess in here, you can imagine if once all this starts to green it up and this full of foliage, you really can't see very far, right? So a deer in this area is going to feel pretty secluded, pretty safe. With this location being a primary, probably the number one primary bedding location on this property, it's very centrally located. So when you have an access, you've got an access that comes up the ridge over here on the far east side, and you've also got one that comes up along the south end and then comes up on the west edge of the property. So it kind of allows you to come up on either side of it depending on wind directions. And that access will allow you to get in and out of here pretty safely without disturbing these deer. Hopefully you can do that, especially as it regens a little bit further. But the location of this kind of pairs up real nice with the food plots down below, the food plots above, as well as the watering hole up there as well.
Yeah, it's right in the middle.
Oh, it's perfect.
And it's about as central on the property as you're gonna get.
Yeah.
Furthest away from any neighbors.
Yep.
Again, on a 73-acre piece, it's unrealistic to think that a deer is gonna live exclusively on a property this size. The goal is to manipulate scenarios like this to just get them spending more time on this property, less time on the neighbors. So that concludes our tour of the property. Bryan, thank you for volunteering to come out and take us around and kind of give us a method to the madness, and give them your contact information in case the next owner or anybody else out there wants to get a hold of you.
Yeah, you can find us. We have a Facebook page. You can find us there at Custom Game Land Services, LLC. You can also find us at customgamelandservices.com. If you have any interest in us continuing the management on this property, we can certainly talk about that. If you're interested in the management that has been done on this property, however, I would be glad to forward the next owner the entire property plan and everything that has been done up to this point. So you can have all the details, all the information, everything that's been done in every location, and I'd be happy to go over that with you. And if you have any other questions about the property itself, I'm more than willing to discuss that with any potential buyer at that point.
That would be great. I would think that would be great information for
I
for the next owner, to know what has been done.
Yeah.
and to continue to kind of elaborate on that, whether by themselves or utilizing yourself.
Yeah.
And on that note, this is the Richland County 73 acres that Justin and I have for sale. Very dynamic property. Not only the 73 acres, but it does come with a fully furnished turnkey home and a beautiful pole barn that you can see in the background there. So if you guys have any questions about it, feel free to give Justin or I a call. Also look up landguys.com and you can see the full listing there.